Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Tonight we have a very special guest, Dan Roberti. Now, I'm sure everyone knows that our current member of Congress in the 5th Congressional District is Chris Murphy. Chris is retiring from Congress to run for the Senate, to run for Joe Lieberman's seat. In his place, we have two candidates running for Congress, one of which is Dan Roberti, and we'll talk to Dan this evening and find out something about Dan. I usually would ask you who you are, where you came from, what brought you to where you are, but I'd like to focus on what you're doing now currently for occupation. As I understand it, you work for Ken Burns.
Yes, I do. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. I work in the public affairs world, and one of the great folks I've had an opportunity to work with and still currently work with is Ken Burns, the filmmaker, The Civil War, National Parks, America's Best Idea, and his upcoming film is going to be Prohibition, and that's what we're working on right now. But specifically, I'm not a filmmaker. I am someone who likes to teach America's history and develop programs that help people here and now. And so what I do for I help on is educational outreach programs across the nation. Folks may remember here in Connecticut there was a lot of veterans issues done during the war a few years ago. National Parks, America's Best Idea. We talked a great deal about environmentalism and preservation, conservation issues. With Prohibition, we're talking about the concept of civility and democracy. And we came upon that concept because 2 years ago we were talking what can we discern in the here and now from this, and we started talking about how that era, the Prohibition era, 1919 to 1933, the only time that there was a constitutional amendment that directly limited all people's rights, and that came out of a third party that rose out of anger, fear-mongering, presidential smear campaigns, and it certainly has a lot of things in common with the polarization we're experiencing today.
I was going to say, it wasn't the party back then, wasn't called the Tea Party, was it, by some chance?
It was not the Tea Party, but there are certainly many parallels between that era and now. But when I talk about it, and particularly when we talk about it with different groups, whether it's school groups or in public forums across the nation, and Ken's definitely going to be coming to Connecticut to talk as well, we talk about the hope that arises from it. Eventually, people sent better people to Congress. People sent folks down to Washington to try to move and progress our society forward, and that amendment was overturned, and it was great progress for us. And of course, we went into a great era with FDR.
I was going to ask, and I've always wanted to know, how in the heck did a country like America, where we have populations that up until that point came principally from Europe, I think, the Irish, the German, groups that came principally from countries where, let's just say, beer is pretty popular. How in the world did an amendment like that ever get passed in America? I can't think of any other country in the world that has ever constitutionally banned the sale or consumption of alcohol. Has there ever been a society that's ever done that?
Not to my knowledge, other than, of course, the Volcker Amendment, then Prohibition.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, you hit on something I think that is also relevant today, and that's the immigrant populations of the time.
Yeah.
And you particularly, if you look at the Germans, and of course it was 1919 when the amendment went into place,
yeah.
and that was also coming off of World War I,
yeah.
and there was quite a bit of animosity towards German Americans. Literally, distilleries were shut down. I won't even talk about some of the horrific acts that were committed against some of the folks involved in German brewing beer here in the United States. And so there's certainly lots of parallels to today in terms of the reaction towards what was then the immigrant population of that era, and a lot of things
my
going on today.
My mom, I don't interject, but my mom, who came here, who was born here, we're off the Mayflower, my mom's side of the family. We've been in America since Miles Standish. My dad's a little different. My dad's, I'm third generation Irish American on my dad's side, so I know about the drinking issue from that perspective. But my mom's told me all about, during World War II, the same way that we had things during the Iraqi war, where you disparage your enemy using terminology. The Dachshund in World War I became the Victory Hound. Sauerkraut became victory cabbage, things like that, and that's how they, that's how they amped people up against those horrible Germans under the Kaiser. That's how you get people amped up when you want to enter into a world war against a country. So yeah, and of course the Irish side of me, wonders how in the world was, because the Irish were here before, generally before 1919, as I recall. A lot of them were here. And of course, they were badly mistreated, like every group of immigrants that ever comes over. But they, they did like the folks are doing nowadays. They learned the language. They try very hard to be super duper patriotic, and eventually they're accepted into the society. And I pray to God that one day all of the folks that are here now will have an opportunity to be Americans and will be assimilated in. Because that's what made America great all along.
And I was going to say the same thing. One of the great things about our country is we are a country that allows for continual progress, for moving forward.
Yeah.
And if you look back, unfortunately, as history often repeats itself in the negative side of things, immigrant populations come over here, and of course they're mistreated. But eventually there's the hope that we can move forward and history can repeat itself in that end as well.
I'm hoping it'll happen.
Because, and also it wasn't that long ago, you brought this up, it wasn't that many years ago that we were talking about freedom fries.
That's the analogy I was hoping you would help me with, because I was reaching for it. The idea of victory cabbage. We have freedom fries, and of course we wanted to disparage the French who wouldn't join us willingly in Iraq. And that's how we kind of turned French fries into freedom fries, in order to give the French a little kick in the keister, or I forget the French word for buttocks. Oh, and speaking of buttocks, of course, the Germans were called Heinies, partly as a twist on the name Heinrich, but also as a twist on buttocks, because the Heine is also another term for buttocks, let's say. So that's another way that they disparaged Germans during World War I. But again, now that we've kind of gone through that, let's backtrack. Unless you want to talk more about Ken Burns and your projects with him.
Well, I could talk forever about the projects we work with him.
A little bit more would be good.
There's actually a little joke that Ken always makes before he shows a clip of his film to an audience when we go around, because we always show a few minutes before we get into it, and he says, actually, the ushers are going to lock the doors and we're going to show the whole 18 hours. You'll get out of here around 8 a.m. tomorrow.
And for those of folks that have watched Ken Burns' documentaries on PBS, they are many parted, because there's a lot of information.
Yes, there is.
So the Civil War one was fascinating. That might be my favorite of all of his documentaries. Baseball, another great documentary. And again, very long and detailed.
He continued it last year with the 10th inning to keep it up to date. It's now up to date to about 2009.
I'll have to watch that. Oh my goodness. So, now we'll get back to the more traditional look. Who are you? Where did you come from? What brought you to where you are now? How did you get involved in the political arena? Is this something you've been doing your entire life?
I'm not your kind of standard politician, but I have certainly been involved in public service my whole life, and I've been involved in service in generally my whole life. My father was a state rep here in Connecticut, down in Bridgeport, when I was a kid, although my parents were divorced young, and I don't have too many memories of that, but I do remember in high school and also in college being very active in the different groups we had, Model Congress, Model UN, and different democratic things in college. But it really came to sort of fruition with me when I was leaving college, and I had, you know, my mother was a single mom most of my life. She was a public school teacher, and you know, we lived paycheck to paycheck. But by the time I was graduating from college, things had turned around. My father and I had repaired our relationship. He had become more successful than I had ever thought. My mother, of course, not having two kids to put food on the table for anymore, was in a better spot. And I looked back, and I really looked at my life as a life of blessings, and I wanted to give back. And so I joined a volunteer corps where I ran the day-to-day operations of a homeless shelter, and I was assigned to Spokane, Washington, on the pretty about far away from Connecticut as you could end up. And it was an eye-opening experience, an interesting experience. But in that experience, I worked with folks who are veterans who had their government turn their back on them. This was before the new GI Bill, which of course is now about to get cut again, and cut and cut and cut. I worked with people who were families living paycheck to paycheck, similar to my mother was when I was a kid, but Mom lost the teaching job or lost the factory job, and now they were coming to the shelter. And that really got a fire burning inside of me, and I think that's really where it began for me. I also had the great pleasure of working with James Carville, who was Clinton's campaign manager back in '91, a great party activist, and he got the fire burning even bigger on the public service side of things.
Merrick Alpert, who ran for the Senate a couple years ago, and ultimately Chris Dodd left the Senate, didn't run for a re-election, and Dick Blumenthal, who's a terrific senator, became elected. But in that transitional time when Chris was in the process of dropping out, Merrick Alpert ran for the Senate on the Democratic ticket. And his narrative was very similar to that, in the sense that he grew up really dirt poor. His mom worked 2 jobs to support the family, single mom, dad was not in the picture from early on, which happens in a lot of American families, unfortunately. It's a fact of life. But he had that same type of narrative, and Merrick was on the show. I think we had him on 3 times while he was running. A really good guy, and I'm hoping there's a place for him in public service somewhere down the road. If not in the Democratic Party, certainly somewhere in the public domain of public service. So now you grew up separate. Mom and Dad are separated. Mom lives in Connecticut. You were born in Bridgeport, you mentioned.
I was born in Bridgeport. Exactly.
I was too.
Oh.
And Mom is buried in the Mountain Grove Cemetery.
Oh, I know.
About 100 yards away from where P.T. Barnum is, the statue of P.T. Barnum. Well, the Windsor plot is there. That's the family name. And Mom's down there, and grew up there, went to Florida. But at any rate, so you born in Bridgeport, your parents separated, your mom stays in Connecticut, your dad goes ultimately to Washington.
Well, most of my life my dad was in Connecticut throughout my childhood life. And I think, it was a story not too uncommon to so many households across here, and that is, I was primarily raised by my mother, and I remember the car trips to visit my dad on the visitation times, and it's a story that is told over and over and over again. And certainly, although at the time there were a lot of things I didn't understand, in my adult life I look back and truly I'm just very happy for the sacrifices that both of my parents made. And we were not dirt poor, but we were certainly working families at the time.
Yeah, and, absolutely, So, what brought you into the political arena? I mean, you've been working for Ken Burns for how many years now?
4 years now.
Yeah.
So I started with the war, which was, and it dovetailed pretty nicely with an issue that's important to me, which is veterans issues. Working both at the shelter and other projects I've done in the public affairs world that I'm in. I've worked with some great things, something called Theater of War, where we try to break down the stigma disorder, primarily within military communities.
We had a marvelous guest on, if I might just say, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Zakaya, who was in the first Battle of Fallujah. He's a retired Marine and spent a lot of time talking about veterans issues, but about he has post-traumatic PTSD. And his many tours, not only in Iraq during the Battle of Fallujah, he was there, but he was also in Black Hawk, right after Black Hawk Down in Somalia.
Wow.
So he's been there and done that, and he had a lot to say about how veterans historically, not just now, not just during the Iraq War, but historically how veterans have been mistreated. And I know we made a lot of improvements in the lives of veterans, brief as it may be, during President Obama's first 2 years, and I know that a lot of that's been rolled back, and that might be certainly an area where you could help, as Chris Murphy has done, has worked really hard.
He really has.
To do that. You might continue that tradition.
It is absolutely a tradition that I strongly want to continue. It is something just near and dear to my house. In fact, this bracelet I wear here is about Fisher House, which is an incredible program where housing for disabled veterans families, unbelievable stuff. It's something I carry here, and you know, we need to treat those folks who are making unbelievable sacrifices for our country, and we need to treat them with dignity and respect when they come home. It is just fundamental that we do that. And you know, I want to see the image we recall of World War II veterans coming home with ticker tape for parades and hugs and just care. And the American people, for the most part, genuinely do that.
Yeah.
It's right now, it's particularly the government that has constantly wanted to cut back to things. And Senator Jim Webb down in Virginia fought so hard to update the GI Bill so that veterans can go to college and can have there's something that they've fought hard for.
Jim, a great veteran, Democratic senator from Virginia.
Yes, indeed.
Secretary of the
Navy, I believe.
Before he became senator.
Yes, indeed, and really did great work. He's retiring from the Senate this year, and hopefully there'll be more folks. And I think Chris Murphy going to the, we hope he goes on to the Senate. I hope he goes on to the Senate. I think he's been an incredible member of Congress for us. Big fan of Chris Murphy's. He's also a big inspiration. You asked why I got involved. I knocked on a lot of doors for him over the years, and so happy that he's running for the Senate right now. But I hope he continues that tradition in the Senate, and there's a lot of other folks out there as well. Senator Blumenthal is one as also. It is something I want to carry on as well, because we have to treat our soldiers and people in uniform, we need to give them what they deserve, and treat them with the compassion and dignity and respect that they deserve for the sacrifices that they're making.
Now, where else have you been in life? I'm not even going to guess your age. You look like you're about 35, 40 years old, I would guess. But I have other friends, like my dear friend Lara Skye, who I have a very difficult time guessing her age, too. And she won't tell me, of course, either. But what else have you done besides work for Ken Burns for the last 4 years?
Exactly, yes. So I've worked with, aside from Ken Burns, and also James Carville, where I did a lot of Hurricane Katrina relief efforts. I went to school down in New Orleans, and also worked on the Take Back the House program.
To say Narlands.
Narlands, yes. Hey, great job with that. Wonderful job with that.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. And also you were...
Oh, yes. And worked with him on many different levels there. But as he discovered, I loved public service. I loved making sure we were sending quality people to Washington. And so I also worked with him on different public servants and working on their campaigns and working on the Take Back the House program in 2006. I've also done a lot of work, not with Ken Burns, but also with public television on things directly related to our crumbling infrastructure. And this is a major piece of sort of where I'm coming from. We need to rebuild America. FDR got us out of the Depression by building America, investing in what was then the infrastructure of the future, which was cars. So we built tunnels, bridges. Nowadays, it's fuel cell technology, it's high-speed rail, it's light rail. It's also recognizing that in the immediate we need to invest just in passenger rail in general, and we also need to rebuild our bridges and roads.
Technology, yeah, that's and we've talked about that with many, many guests on the show about the concept of 21st century jobs and technology, alternative energy. Because, in fact, as I've heard from 4 or 5 different guests, and of course fact-checked and found that it's true, Germany produces literally all of its electricity from solar. And what separates Germany from Connecticut, let's say, in terms of climate? And the answer is nothing.
And there's also so many other forms of alternative energy that we can be investing in. We need to emerge the leaders in alternative energy, because that means jobs. It means job creation. It means jobs right here in Connecticut, right here in Danbury. Fuel cell technology.
Yes.
We do that here in Danbury. We are one of the leaders in the country. Let's become the leaders in the world and grow jobs right here in America. That's what we need to be doing. And right here in Danbury,
I believe, is still ranked as the sixth top technology center in America. And that's a very well-earned and well-deserved accolade. But when we have all those incredibly high-skilled people, they could transit from, well, Connecticut has a lot of military industry.
Yes, we do.
And certainly we could transit those jobs from, let's say, for instance, with Sikorsky building helicopters to building wind turbines, for example.
Oh, yes.
We have that capacity to make Connecticut great in terms of alternative energy, to bring jobs back here, and we need to do that. You know, that's just something we've as I say, we've had many guests on that have discussed that, and I'm hoping that we'll get to that point one day, hopefully sooner rather than later. I mean, I understand that other states have problems, and other states want to get there and lower their unemployment and create these important jobs to do that, but you know, we live here in Connecticut. Let's bring it here first.
Exactly. Let's bring it. And not only that, though, there's plenty of new technology to go around. I mean, as a nation, we need to be fighting tooth and nail to make sure we emerge the leader in all of these different manufacturing jobs that there are, and bring back the working class. And certainly here in Connecticut, where we already have the skeleton, the bare bones for it, and we just need to start expanding that and building on it and allowing it to grow. And there's so many different venues we can go down to do that, and do it in a way also that grows our economy, that helps starting to eliminate our deficit. We can do this on the way. Public-private partnerships are an important way to doing that. And if we stop pushing the kicking the can down the road and focus on what we need to do here and now, we can make a lot of people's lives Connecticut. We can bring back much better. We can bring back jobs and put people back to work, which is what we need to be doing now.
What is the government's role in this? Because we hear a lot of people saying, get the government off our backs, but I'm of a mind that we as a government can do many, many great things that we really can't accomplish as individuals. That's why we have a government. That's what makes a government, when it's functioning properly for us, that's what makes a government powerful. What can the government do? What can we do as a state government, federal government? Well, your area of anew is going to be federal government with the Congress. But what can the Congress do in order to achieve these great things for America as a country?
And you hit on this in what you were just talking about in your question, and that is that we're in this together. We need to come together, and government is supposed to be about bringing people together to solve problems. And on the federal level, we send representatives down to Washington, D.C. And that's why I say I don't want to be Dan Barry or the 5th District's congressman. I want to be the representative. I want to truly represent them in Washington, and we need more people down there who look at the role from that perspective, so that we start working together and we start having civil discourse, an honest dialogue with each other, and start talking about how we can work together. Because right now, we're being pulled apart. We're being polarized. And it's extreme left and extreme right, extreme right, and the Tea Party, which I don't even know what you call it anymore, is holding our government hostage.
There's actually two Tea Parties. You know, there's the Tea Party that's the Libertarian Tea Party, and there's the Tea Party, which is controlled by the powers that be of the Republican Party, and there's battles between them. There's battles going on between them. Not as public maybe as I'd like to see battles, but there's a huge war going on between those two Tea Parties.
Oh yes, and I'll tell you, very public debate that happened where it was manipulated to hurt the American people. It certainly completely compromised our democratic principles, and that was in the debate over the debt ceiling being raised. And basically the overarching Republican Party took advantage of this Tea Party wing, 60 to 70 members who are so extreme that they want to see government end entirely. They want to see really our country just drive off a cliff, and they were willing to let that happen. And what the Republican Party overall did was they sat back and they let it get to the brink, so that Democrats had no choice but to compromise their values and take a horrible vote in order to save the country. And so what we ended up getting in that deal was something that's really very hurtful to our nation, but at least our nation didn't fall off the cliff the way the Tea Party did. And it was unfortunately masterfully manipulated by the Republican House that's in control. And that is something that we really do. We have to fight against. We have to stand firm on our democratic principles. It's something I promise to do, while also figuring how can we compromise with each other as human beings and as a society without compromising these important values that we know are so important to move us forward as a country and bring jobs back to Connecticut and our nation and grow our economy and build the world-class education system that we should have and that our children deserve, so that we continue to push folks out there who are able, put people out there who are able to be the working class, folks on the front lines of growing towards new technologies and making this country the greatest country it possibly can be and the greatest country in the world.
Well, a lot of friends that I have, and I consider myself to be a progressive Democrat, but a lot of my friends, friends like Mike Toto, very bright guy, and a lot of other very bright people that I'm with have been very unhappy with President Obama, not so much in the things that he's tried to accomplish, but in his unwillingness to use the bully pulpit, as Mike likes to put it, the bully pulpit, like from Teddy Roosevelt's day. Use the bully pulpit to ram stuff down the Republicans' throats. And unfortunately, and I expressed this to these guys from day one when Obama was even running for president, but President Obama is very much like that other skinny senator from Illinois. He's a little too compromising for my likes and for most of our likes, but that's his nature as a human being. He's a brilliant guy, his heart's in the right place, but he won't jam stuff down the opposition's throat.
And I think that when President Obama approaches, all of these different things, first off, right now he's facing a Congress that wants him to fail. I mean, that is their number one goal.
Yeah.
They want him to fail.
They've said that from day one.
They've said it. They've been open about it.
Yeah.
And they are attacking him at every chance they get. And it will be very interesting to see what happens with his jobs bill that he's put out there. It's a very centrist jobs bill overall, and I'm sure they're going to attack and attack and attack. We're
going to have to wind it down there. This has been Progressive Soup. Sorry. See how fast the half hour goes?
Oh,
Progressive
yes.
Soup. I'm David
fun.
Stevenson, Dan Roberti, running for Congress in Connecticut, 5th District. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much.
So now we have to lean over and...
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, and I will also say thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had to cut you off, but
it happens.
They gave me the 30 seconds, and we still had so much left to talk about. But
I have a feeling you and I could probably talk for a long time.